And it's the last Sunday in July. And oh, how this year has flown so fast. Every week here, we talk about life, our relationships, our families, our society, our faith, and the experiences that shape us into the people we become. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we disagree. But my hope is that we always leave here thinking just a little differently than when we arrived. Today's conversation began with a phrase that had been trending on social media over the past few weeks. Perhaps you've heard it, the Olodo Uprising. It was popularized by Nigerian rapper YC during a podcast interview, and almost immediately the social media erupted. Some people applauded him, others criticized him, some called him brave, and others arrogant. The conversation quickly became about whether YC was insulting people or simply describing what he sees happening around us. And as I listened to the debate, I found myself becoming less interested in YC's words and more interested in what those words revealed about us. Because I don't think this is really a conversation about one musician. I think it's a conversation about all of us, and more importantly, who gets to tell our stories. Before we go any further, let me say this. Today's program is not about mocking anyone. It's not about saying that anyone or everyone must become a professor, lecturer, or learned. It's not about suggesting that intelligence belongs only to people with degrees. Far from it. Some of the wisest people I've ever met never attended university, and some of the most foolish people I've ever encountered have impressive academic qualifications. So, wisdom and education are not always the same thing, and I hope we all know that. But what's most important is learning, and learning is a choice. Curiosity is a choice. Remaining teachable is a choice. And I worry that we're gradually becoming uncomfortable with those choices. Now, have you noticed something? That everything today must be quick. We have quick meals, 2 minutes instant noodles, quick money, quick fame, quick success, quick spirituality, quick relationships, quick information. Everything is at the tip of our fingers. We have become a generation that expects life to arrive in bite-sized pieces. And we don't just want answers, we want instant answers. We don't just want information, we want information without effort. Think about how we consume books today. And I am an avid reader. So this is very troubling for me. Because many people proudly announce, I didn't read the book, I watched the summary. Or I'll just wait for someone to explain it on YouTube. Or perhaps I watch the novel or the movie instead. Now, before anyone comes after me, I've said it. I love good summaries, but the summary does not tell you all that happens in the novel. It doesn't tell you, it doesn't give you the feelings and the emotions and the broadening of mind and perception when you're reading the book. I appreciate when people define things and make them easier to understand, because it helps us decide whether we want to go deeper or whether we want to just be read the book on the surface. But somewhere along the line, the summary has stopped being the introduction and it's become the destination for so many people. And that worries me, because there are things you simply cannot compress into 60 seconds, 1 minute, 3 minutes, 90 minutes. Some things you must really just go through. And when I was younger, really reading has always excited me, to be sure, to be sincere. I was told that I started reading from the age of 3, and I started reading newspapers. And today I read voraciously. I read 2 or 3, 4 books at the same time. I read on the ebooks. I read also paperbacks, hardbacks. I like to feel the book in my hand, and I like to see it also on the screen. And some books have stretched me. Some have confused me. A lot of them have challenged me. And sometimes I had to read the same paragraph 3 times or more before it finally made sense. But isn't that how learning works? Is growth not supposed to require effort? Is understanding not supposed to take time? We don't complain, and we shouldn't complain that muscles become stronger after exercise. So, why do we then expect our minds to become stronger without intellectual exercise? Hmm. It's very, very interesting that we seem to want what we don't want to pay for. And so let me ask you, when was the last time you read something that was challenging to you? Not something you had already agreed with, because a lot of times we go towards the things that are familiar to us. And I'll give an example. One of the last 3, 4 books I read was called something called a novel in verse. I don't like poems, even though I like reading. I read fiction, I don't read non-fiction much. And this book, because I don't like poems, I was wondering, will I really like the book? And I found out that I enjoyed it because the book was written as if it were a poem. And maybe it made for faster reading, so it was easy to understand, easy to assimilate. But it just shows that we have to um, expand our horizons and broaden our experiences, and that not everything we agree with from the beginning is bad. We just have to delve into things to understand and know what they are. And that we'll see that when we look at things that are unfamiliar to us, and we read and we see things about those things, it changes our perspective. It makes us pause and say, oh, I've never seen that thing that way before. So what are we talking about today? The Olodo Uprising, and who gets to tell our stories? Our phone lines are 07000 and 09155 and 917. And our toll-free line is 0800 I'll take the lines again. 07000 and 0800 917. Now, the questions I want to ask us is that, do you think we have become less willing to learn than previous generations? Or do you think older generations simply don't understand how young people learn today? Call us and we'll talk about it. Now, we've been asking ourselves, at least since I started this program, whether we've been uncomfortable with learning. Well, let's balance the conversation. There's absolutely nothing wrong with making knowledge accessible. Um, it's amazing how Google has solved so many problems for us, and how knowledge is at the tip of our fingers, and we just want to find out something. We can verify, we can use AI to verify what people say. We can use it to establish a truth or to show that someone is telling lies. And I admire people who can explain complicated ideas simply. That's a gift. And the best teachers do that. So also do the best communicators. But accessibility is not the enemy today. Oversimplification is. And they're two very different things. Let me explain. Imagine a doctor. You ask, Doctor, what is wrong with me? And the doctor doesn't respond by reading medical textbooks full of Latin terms, but explains your condition in language you understand. The doctor hasn't removed the science, but it has translated it. Now that's excellent communication. Now imagine another doctor saying, don't worry about understanding your condition, just take this. That's different. So one respects your intelligence, the other discourages curiosity. And the same applies to films. Not every ending should be explained. The thing about the Olodo Uprising, really, and the fuss about it, is that a lot of people think it's dumbing our intellect. And it's true, because everybody wants to have easy access. Before, when you were reading a book or listening to a movie, people, sometimes the directors left things so that you could either um make up your mind as to what you wanted to believe about the story, or you could use your imagination to imagine what would be the end of the story, or what could be, the idea behind the story. Some films invite us to think, and some books deliberately leave questions unanswered. I remember that there was a book that I read, and I really loved it because it gave me perspective. It gave us three options, the readers, three options as to how the story could have ended. It didn't give us easy answers, but it just gave us options, and it made us think, much more about the book, even after I'd finished reading the book. What could the author be getting at? What did she really mean? Or what did he really mean by that statement or by that scene that was created? And it's the same thing with films. We should think about the things that we've read or watched way after we've watched them or we've read them. And that's what it means to awaken our curiosity. It means to awaken our understanding. And it's not bad storytelling if the person does, or the author or the producer doesn't tell you what happens at the end. No, it's very good storytelling. In fact, it trusts that the audience would participate in the movie or in the book. But unfortunately, today, we often demand that everything be obvious. If a film doesn't explain every scene, people call it confusing. If a novel requires patience and it takes a while for you to get really to the meat of the story, we call it boring. And if an article is longer than 3 minutes, we ask for a summary. We've become so uncomfortable with mystery, so uncomfortable with nonsense, and we've lost our appetite for curiosity. And in that, we've become very vulnerable to manipulation. So the reader shows us what we want to read, the producer shows us what we want to see. And because we don't ask any further, then we are even very more vulnerable to manipulation. So let me ask a question again. And after this question, we'll go on a music break. And when I come back, I would love to hear your answers. Now, would you rather your child learn to memorize answers or learn how to ask good questions? And I'll say that because education isn't really about having all the answers. It's about knowing how to ask better questions. It's about knowing where to find the answers, and that's why plagiarism is frowned at university, because the lecturers don't want you to just vomit what any other person has done. They want you to use what they've done to seek for more answers and to ask the right questions. So I'll leave you with those questions. Would you rather your child learn to memorize answers or learn how to ask good questions? And see you at the end of the music break. Right with Tara on WFM 91.7. I'm Tara Ishida, and today we're asking a question that I hope stays with you long after this program ends. Who gets to tell our stories? And I asked the question before we went on the music break that if you would you rather your child learn to memorize answers or learn to ask good questions? Now, don't think that today is all about reading and watching films, because I want to take it more than that. Before the break, we talked about the growing preference for easy answers over deeper understanding. But now I want us to go beyond books and social media, because for me, the greatest danger isn't simply that people don't read enough. I think the greatest danger is that we're gradually surrendering our narratives to people who have never lived them. Now, there are some stories you cannot borrow. There's a saying that's been around for years. Until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the author. Or until the story always goes the way of the victor. If you're the vanquished, it's the victor that is going to tell how the war went. Then and they're not going to talk about their own faults and their own losses. They're going to talk about their victories. History has often or mostly been written by victors. Communities have been defined by outsiders. Cultures have been interpreted by visitors. For example, we know that as in Africa, we were colonized by the British. And so they got to tell us our stories. And it's today and nowadays in the present time that we're having a renaissance, and we're getting to know what our culture is and how good our culture is and why it's not even bad, but we were so blindfolded, if I may use that word, to think, or we were sold the story that our culture is inferior to the white man's culture, just because we didn't know our culture and we couldn't tell our stories, and someone else was telling the stories on our behalf. Families also have been judged by people who only saw one chapter of their story. And when that happens, something important is lost: perspective, context, truth. As a lawyer, especially a family lawyer, I've learned one lesson that has stayed with me throughout my career. There are at least three versions of every story: the story of A, or maybe I would say his story, the story of B, and maybe I should say our story, and then somewhere in between, the truth. When a case comes before the court, the judge doesn't simply listen to who speaks the loudest. The judge listens, questions, examines evidence, and considers context, because life is really as simple as social media would have us believe. Yet online, everyone wants immediate conclusions. Someone posts 30 seconds of a disagreement. Within minutes, thousands of strangers have decided who is guilty, who is innocent, who should leave the marriage, who should keep the children, without knowing the facts, without hearing the other side, without appreciating the years that came before that 30, 60, or 90-second clip. We have become remarkably comfortable judging stories we barely understand. And perhaps that is why I have become increasingly cautious about quick responses and opinions. The older I grow, the more I realize that life is complicated. Relationships, marriage, very complicated. Parenting, doubly complicated. Grief, very complicated, because no one grieves the same way. No one's situation is the same way. Healing, very complicated too. The bottom line is that human beings are complicated. And that doesn't mean that truth doesn't exist. It simply means truth often takes time to uncover. And if we lose our patience for complexity, we also lose our ability to recognize truth, because Life is not a linear line. It's convoluted. It has twists, it has turns, and sometimes we'll hear just one part of the story, and by the time we conclude and then hear the other part of the story, we would now find out that we were wrong. Now, one of the things I enjoy most about writing is hearing from people who say, "Oh, I read that article and it changed my mind about what I thought about that subject that you wrote about." And when people say that to me, I'm very, very happy. And I hope that as you listen to today's show, you'll also will change your mind about the things that we're talking about today. Because there are things research can teach you, and there are things only experience can teach you. Please don't misunderstand me. Research matters, education matters, listening matters, but lived experience matters too. Someone who has walked through fire sees flames differently from someone who has only read about them. Neither perspective is worthless, but they're not the same. And I keep on saying that, most especially, when I see all the comments and all the things that people say and write. Your story, you can't tell another person's story unless you've walked in that person's shoes. Remember, the title of my, or the byline of my topic today is "Who Gets to Tell Our Stories?" Because if the person is not standing or sitting in your seat, standing in your shoes, they really can feel it the way that you feel. So let me ask you a question. And our phone lines are now open, rather. 07000 and 09155 and a toll free number is 0800 Now let me ask you a question. Has anyone ever made assumptions about your life based on one moment? Maybe because you were divorced, maybe because you lost a spouse, maybe because your child behaved badly once, or maybe because of the way you look, the way you carry yourself, the way you speak, the maybe the marks on your face. How did it make you feel? Did it make you feel understood or misunderstood? Call us. We love to hear your story. Like I said earlier, our lines are 07000 and 09155 and 0800 Now, somebody will say, "Tara, surely people are entitled to their opinions." And I totally agree with that. Everyone is entitled to their opinions. Everyone is entitled to say their side of the story from the way they see it. But opinions become more valuable when they're informed. There's a difference between having an opinion and having an understanding. And there's a big difference, because you see, when you have an opinion, you have it from your own perspective. But when you have an understanding of the matter, you have it from the person or the people involved's perspective. And so an opinion is totally different from having understanding. And that's why we should never stop asking, what don't I know yet? Because there's always something we don't yet know about the stories that we hear, about the things that we hear, about the um, patterns that we see, about the end results in the matters that come our way and the circumstances that come our way. Now, I've talked about telling our stories and how it's very important that we see things from other people's perspective, how it's very important that we do not give opinions, but rather we seek understanding of other people's um, perspective. I've also talked about how it's so easy nowadays for us to numb intelligence, and how people want quick fixes, don't want to read much, don't want to go through the process, but want quick fixes. Now, there's another side to this conversation, and I think it's a very important side to the conversation. And it's if we don't tell our stories, someone else will. I think I've mentioned it lightly in saying that as Africans, our stories have been told for so long by the people that colonized us. And now there's a renaissance going on all across our nation, all across the continent. And we're seeing that we enjoy our own music. We're proud about our own clothing. We celebrate our culture, not because it's unique, not because it's different, but because it's ours and because we understand it better. And I think that we ought to do more and more of this. And then maybe if we do more and more of this, then there won't be that Olodo uprising, you know, because a lot of us complain and we complain even not only about our cultures as a continent, as a country, but we're talking about even our regional cultures, our tribal cultures. A lot of us complain that our stories are misunderstood. You know, we complain that maybe our cultures are misunderstood, that, you know, a lot of things are wrong with the culture and with the way people look at us and the way people talk about us. But let me ask us a difficult question. Have we told those stories ourselves? Because if we leave the narrative of our storytelling and our lives to outsiders to tell, they're going to tell it from their own perspective. Stories don't remain untold forever. If those who know remain silent, then someone else is going to speak. And they will tell the story from the only perspective that they have. Some of them will do it innocently, some will do it carelessly, some will do it for entertainment, and some will do it for profit. But almost never will do it with the depth that comes from living it. Think about the books we've read, the films we've watched, the documentaries that shape how the world sees us as Africans. Who is writing them? Who is producing them? Whose voices are being amplified? And equally important, whose voices are missing? I often worry that some of our children know more about the foreign history than they know about their own grandparents, than they know about their own village, you know, because of course the totality of the nation does not end in the region that we're born, in the state that we're born. It spreads around, and what we think is so unique or different about our own culture might be the same in other cultures that we've not investigated. So our children are growing up knowing so much about other cultures and not so much about us. They don't know about the stories of our heroes because, like I said, the stories that were told by the victors and not the vanquished. They don't know about how fiercely people fought for our independence. They don't know how fiercely people fought for a good country, for the country that we now enjoy. They don't even, let's even bring it closer home. A lot of us don't even know about our grandparents, our great grandparents, you know, and they don't have to be famous. They don't have to be the people that fought against the colonial masters for us to know them. Just our parents that maybe owned, like a friend of mine was saying some time ago, our grandmother owned dye pits, you know, in she comes from Ogun State, and they all died, she all died pits. So she was called Mama Laru, you know, and apart from that fact, they never knew what happened. She died, and her dye pits died with her. And look at now, today, Adire is being celebrated all over the place. And my friend, who had a rich history in Adire making, can't even make money or anything out of it. So our children don't know our stories. They don't know family traditions. They don't know why we even bear the names that we bear. They don't know even the things that have happened in our genealogy that will serve. You see, sometimes when sickness happens and when ailments happen, we seem to think it's the work of the devil. But sometimes, or seem to think it's a curse. I remember reading a story about a family that all the males never grew more than, never reached the age of 50. Between 40 and 50, they had, they died suddenly. And that was the story. Until one of them, who was living abroad, was very particular about his health, having heard the story, having been warned of the story, having been warned of the curse that was running in their family. And so was very particular and took tests and everything. And they found out that he had a congenital defect in his heart. And when they checked his son, they found out that the son too had it, and they just surmised that that must have been what, was killing all the males in their family. But because nobody even listened to the, understood the story, understood their history, they just assumed and took what somebody must have said to them, that there was a curse, in the family existing. So they don't know. We don't know our history. We don't know a lot of things. We used to, and it was our teaching that told us that traditional medicine, for example, was bad, and that, the leaves and the herbs and the spices that our forefathers used was bad. But now we're going back to them. We're seeing the knowledge, we're seeing the good in them. And I just remember the fact that somebody showed me a picture of chewing stick being sold for dollars in a natural shop. And this chewing stick that we, laugh at people when they chew them. But we found out, or medicine has found out, that those chewing stick had medicinal value. And so because we don't know our stories, we don't know our history, we don't know the things that our forefathers did, our parents did, and why they did it, we're losing ourselves. And other people are telling our stories to us. Other people are telling us our history. Other people are showing us the good in our land. I recollect yesterday, I was looking through social media, and one popular travel tourist is in Nigeria, and he kept on going to so many places. And as he went to all those places, both the high and mighty places, the expensive places, and even the low places, I saw the country through his eyes in another way. And unfortunately, he was the one telling the story. I knew the story, I knew the things that he was saying, but I wasn't talking about them. And so I had left it, and you had left it, and a lot of us had left it, to someone else to talk about it. So if you're listening as a parent or even a grandparent, may I encourage you to become the historian of your family. Tell your children where they're from. Tell them how you met their father, their mother, how you met your best friend. Tell them your history. Tell them about the sacrifices that have been made in your family. Tell them about failure. Tell them about resilience. Tell them about why your family values what it values. Tell them about the meanings of their names. So many of us don't even know the meanings of our names, don't know how we came about the names that we bear, don't know the histories behind our names, don't know, a lot about our culture and our tradition and our history. Don't assume they will ask later, because sometimes later might be too late. Later we might not be around to answer the questions that they're asking, because they've come to now realize how important those questions are. If you're a doctor, if you're a professional, write, pick up a subject and let people understand, what's all about that subject, and don't just leave it to quacks on the bus stop to tell people about their medical history when you know the truth. If you're a lawyer, teach. If you're a teacher, mentor. If you're an artisan, document your craft. Let people know. I'm not saying show off your trade secrets. No, not at all. But let There's so many crafts, so many things that we've lost because we've not documented them. We've not documented the process. So it's been touch and go because we don't understand how to transfer stories and how to transfer knowledge. Not because your story is the only story. I'm not saying that. If you've even survived something difficult, share your testimony. Not because you're the only one that has shared this shared that path or gone that path, but because it's one of the stories that deserves to be preserved. Too many, too many people, too many experts have become silent whilst misinformation has become confident, and we're letting other people tell the narrative, own the narrative, while we know that that narrative is false. And because nobody's challenging them, they say it so confidently. So, like I said, I would like to hear from you. Our lines are 07000 and 09155 Our toll free number is 0800 Have you been told the stories of your family? Or have you even told your children the stories of their family? Do your children know your parents' stories? Unfortunately for me, I don't know much of my parents' stories or my grandparents' stories. I gleaned little, but I wish I did. My grandfather was a writer, so he left some books, but apart from that, I really don't know his story. So, do your children know your history? Do they know your story? Have you ever wished that you asked your grandparents more questions before they passed away? Do you think we are documenting Nigerian stories well enough? Let's have that conversation. And then we'll take a short music break. And when I come back, I want to leave you with hope.
I still see your shadows in my room. Can't take back the love that I gave you. It's to the point where I love and I hate you, and I cannot change you, so I must replace you. See you sitting down and I thought you were the one. Listening to my heart, it's kind of my head. Found another one, but I'm the better one. I won't let you forget me. I still see your shadows in my room. Can't take back the love that I give you. It's to the point where I love and I hate you, and I cannot change you, so I must replace you. See you said and done. I thought you were the one. Listening to my heart, it's kind of my head. Found another one, but I am the better one. I won't let you forget me. You left me falling and landing inside my grave. I know that you want me dead. I take prescriptions.
Welcome back to Life with Tara on WFM 91.7. I'm Tara Ishida, and today we've been talking about something much bigger than a trending phase. We've been talking about learning, about curiosity, about truth, about who gets to tell our stories. And if you're just joining us, let me assure you that this program isn't about right or wrong. It's about the responsibility each of us has to preserve truth in a world that increasingly rewards speed over substance. So, where do we go from here? Because it's easy to complain. It's easy to say young people don't read anymore. It's easy to blame social media. It's easy to blame schools and easy to blame parents. But if all we do is complain, then we're simply adding more noise to an already noisy world. The best question I think we should be asking is, what can I do? Not what the government should do, not what the schools should do, not what social media should do, but what can I? do. Let's take some responsibility. I like to leave you with what I'm calling the Story Keeper's Challenge, because every one of us is a keeper of someone's story. Now, the first challenge, stay curious. Never become too old or too successful or too educated to learn something new. The moment we believe we know everything, we stop growing. Read that book. Listen to the people who disagree with you. Listen to understand their perspective. And you might not agree with them, but listen to understand their perspective. What is different to you is different to somebody else. You know, one thing about traveling that I see and that I like is that what is the culture in one place and what is vilified in the other is respected in another place. So listen to people, ask questions, be willing to change your mind when the facts and the occasions demand it. Curiosity is not weakness, it is wisdom. The second challenge, tell your story. Every family has stories, every profession has stories, every community has stories. Tell them, but not only tell them, write them down. Record your parents, interview your grandparents, keep photographs, write journals. Tell your children about the mistakes you've made, not just the successes. Leave behind more than property, leave behind perspective. One day, someone will want to know who you are. Give them something truthful to find. The third challenge, respect expertise. We live in a time when everyone and their uncle and their auntie has a microphone, and it's wonderful. But remember, having a platform doesn't automatically make someone an authority. Writing a PDF book using AI doesn't make someone an authority. Learn to ask who is speaking, what qualifies them, what experience informs this opinion. Not because we worship credentials, but because truth deserves careful handling. The fourth challenge, raise thinkers, not repeaters. If you're raising children, please don't only teach them answers, teach them questions. Instead of asking, what did you learn today? Try asking, what surprised you today? What made you curious today? What challenged your thinking today? Curious children become thoughtful adults. Adults who ask questions are harder to manipulate. The fifth challenge, become a custodian of truth. Whether you're a teacher, a mechanic, a nurse, a lawyer, a trader, a pastor, an artist, or a student, someone is learning from you. Live in such a way that the stories you pass on are honest. Correct misinformation when you encounter it. Encourage reading. Celebrate thoughtful conversations and never be ashamed to say, I don't know. Sometimes those three words are the beginning of wisdom. Before I leave you today, permit me one final thought. Over the years, I've had the privilege of writing about widowhood, about parenting, family, grief, relationships, and I've discovered that what resonates most with people isn't what I say or that I have all the answers. It's that I tell the truth as I have experienced it. And sometimes that truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes it challenges people. Sometimes it even changes my own thinking. But I've come to believe that truth deserves witnesses, not perfect people, just honest ones. And maybe that's why this conversation matters so much to me, because I don't want us to become people who consume stories without questioning them, or a people who surrender our narratives because someone else has a larger platform. Every generation inherits stories, but every generation also has a responsibility to leave stories behind. And what kind of stories are we living? Let's ask ourselves that. What kind of stories are we living? Long after we're gone, our houses will belong to someone else. Our belongings, our cars, our clothes, somebody else is going to take them. But the stories we leave behind, those have the power to outlive us. They shape our families, our communities, and our nation. So please don't leave your story untold. Don't assume someone else will tell it accurately. Every story is going to be told. The only question is who gets to tell it. Don't surrender that responsibility to someone else and then act surprised when the truth is edited to fit someone else's agenda. The loudest voice is not always the wisest voice, and the most popular version is not always the truest version. Before next week's program, I'd like to give you a simple assignment. This week, ask someone older than you to tell you a story you've never heard before. It could be your mother, father, aunt, uncle, neighbor. Tell them, ask them, tell me something about your life that you don't want forgetting, and then write it down and then share it with somebody else. Thank you for spending this time with me. If today's conversation challenged you, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and you can continue the conversations with your loved ones. Till next week, Sunday at 1 p.m., this has been Tara Eshida. Have a beautiful week and see you next week, Sunday.
91.3